My name is Mark Enright. Some people may know me better as Mortar, which is my kind of brand company name that I started a while back. And basically I make masks, novelty items, also paint and draw a little bit, but masks are my primary thing that I make, latex masks. And I also collect latex masks and some action figures, mostly vintage Star Wars toys, Star Wars masks, vintage ones, and model kits. I've been making masks. It's been just about 4 years to the day almost, actually, that I started making masks. I started sculpting about 15 years ago, but I started sculpting actually in mortar, brick mortar, and I would make relief sculptures of Star Wars characters. And I kind of started that to supplement my income to buy more collectibles. And it kind of snowballed into creating more, and the creation of things became more important than collecting them. So now I kind of make more things for other people to collect than for myself to collect. The things I create and the things I collect, actually, I'll have a real nostalgic connection for me. Vintage Star Wars figures like Walrus Man and Hammerhead and Greedo. All those toys were things that I loved as a kid and played with them, for years and years. And I think also taking a lot of those things that I liked as a kid and turning them into masks is just something new for those other people out there that have connections to those items. And when they see that, they're like, oh, I gotta have that, I want that in my life. Kind of the same reason why I made it, because I wanted it to exist, so I started making them. As far as inspiration, I was a songwriter and a musician for probably like 20 years of my life before I fully got into art. And so as a songwriter, you get inspiration from everywhere. Like it could be a word, an image, something you read in a book, and that's carried over for me in mask making. I think of masks as a song pretty much. I think of a title, like you think of something like Fang Face or Frankenstein 2001. You have a great title, and it just gives you a good jumping off place for making a mask or creating a mask. So inspiration is everywhere. It's on like I said before, Halloween decorations, on vintage box art for model kits. There's so much stuff out there to be inspired by. I have tons of influences. They probably don't show up much in my work, but the big influence on me was Ralph McQuarrie. As a kid, I remember getting the Empire Strikes Back trading cards, and they had his paintings on them, and those still to the day are some of my favorite paintings. Ray Harryhausen. I grew up watching all the Sinbad movies, Clash of the Titans. Star Wars obviously had a huge influence on me. Bob Ross. When I was a kid, my grandfather, he would watch Bob Ross with me. He went out, bought canvases and oil paint, and we would do oil painting in the Bob Ross style. I don't know if that's kind of cliche to say Bob Ross is an influence, because he probably influenced tons of people, because I'm sure tons of people have seen his videos, and people kind of think of him as a joke or not a serious artist, with the happy trees and happy accidents or whatever. But to me, that was a real, early on, that was something that I got to do that I'm sure, helped develop my skill set in some way, till now. The materials I use, my main material is latex. I try to make everything I can out of latex. I used to use mortar, and when I used to sculpt in mortar, it's basically like sculpting in cake mix or mud. That's why they were relief sculptures, because you had to sculpt them flat. But now, when I transitioned into clay, I make molds, hydrocal molds. Everything is hydrocal molds, and I use water clay. Probably 99% of the time I use wet clay. That's what I sculpt all my masks in. So I sculpt them in wet clay, I make the mold out of hydrocal, and then I cast them in latex. And also all the other novelty items I make, like the eye pads and eye pukes that are like fake puke, fake blood puddles with eyeballs in them, and melted snowmen. I have all that stuff, and I make it all out of latex with stone molds. I have a huge list of items that I want to make, so I pretty much go on that list or requests or commissions that I get to choose a project. Once I know what it is, if it's an existing character, I'll just try to gather as much reference as I can from all angles to help me sculpting. If it's an action figure, because I do a lot of action figure masks, it's really great to have the 3D representation sometimes of that item. And so from there, I'll make the sculpts, and that takes anywhere from probably a month, because I'm not working on it every day. Once that happens, I'll make the mold. The mold usually takes about a whole day to make. It could be like 8 to 13 hours to make a mold sometimes, depending on the size. From there, once the mold dries, I clean it out. I cast it up in latex, trim all the flashing off, cut eye holes in it, breathing holes, ventilation, that type of thing, and then paint it, airbrush it, and send it off to the customer. I do everything myself. It would be nice to have somebody to mold it so I could just keep sculpting and just pass the mold off and have someone else make the mold, because a lot of people don't like the molding process. I like making the molds. It's just very time consuming and very messy, and if you don't make a good mold, you're not going to get a good product. Or, you know, when I'm doing an action figure, if I mold it, I try to keep it as accurate as I can to the action figure. So I'll even follow the seam line on the action figure when I do the mold. Because the seam line exists on the action figure, I like to leave it there a little bit so you can get that full action figure look to it. Last year I did for Mask Fest, which was my very first time going to Mask Fest, the Halloween 3 tribute mask. So I combined the witch, the skull, and the pumpkin all in one mask. And then I made a hood, the plush hood, and then I painted it, and it's the 3 styles. My mom used to work for Singer Sewing Machines, and I would go to work with her. Her boss had a VCR in the back, and I would just sit back there and watch horror movies for hours. You know, Halloween 1, Halloween 2, and Halloween 3. And Halloween 3, I watched that so many times. That's been one of my favorite movies, probably my whole life. So obviously Trick or Treat Studios, they got the license and they put those masks out again, which is great because I have those. It was good to have those, be able to go just buy them again. But I really wanted to do something Halloween 3 inspired for Mask Fest too. So that was probably my favorite project. I do collect some toys. I have a few action figures. I have some Remco mini monsters. I collect those. I have a few Star Wars characters, loose ones. At one time I had an entire Walrus Man character focus, and my whole collection was all Walrus Man, you know, carded figures, loose figures, prototypes, packaging prototypes. I had everything Walrus Man almost that you can imagine. But then it just got to the point where I had so much stuff that the next things on the list were just too expensive. From there I collected model kits, and I collected all the vintage Star Wars model kits from different countries. As a kid, one of the very first model kits I built that were Star Wars was the C-3PO figure model. And I remember getting that model as a kid and building it on my grandparents' table. I didn't even use instructions. It was just so easy to glue it together. And so, you know, those Star Wars models have a real nostalgic connection with me too. Then when I got into collecting masks, because masks now, as you can probably see around me, take up most of my collecting space. So once I got into masks, the model kits kind of fell by the wayside. I started collecting about 16 years ago. And it was probably because I discovered eBay. And I was able to go on eBay and get back all the stuff I had as a kid, and also get all the stuff that I wanted as a kid but never got. Like I have a Kenner Hugo, and that was something I didn't have as a kid, but I found one that someone had thrown away, and I always wanted one, and it didn't have any of the accessories, but I had that. And my little cousin, he was so terrified of it. He said the eyes were creepy, so I cut the eyes out of it. And then it was even more creepy, so that my mom made me just get rid of it completely. And, you know, I have a Lando Calrissian in disguise. I have that one. That was the last action figure I ever got as a kid. You know, we went to the store, and my grandfather was buying stuff for the kids, and I was like 12 or something at that point. You know, I got that, and that was the last, Star Wars item I ever got as a kid. It doesn't have to be something I had as a child. Pretty much anything that I really like, or really affects me, that I get some kind of reaction from, I like to collect. Well, as far as grails, I don't really have a lot of grails. I've been looking for a Chewbacca Don Post mask with the open mouth for quite a while. As far as the things in my collection, I have a light beam lightsaber, which is basically a flashlight with a big tube on it. And I remember getting that as a kid. There's a Star Wars poster art kit by Craftmaster. And Craftmaster was from General Mills, who owned Kenner, so that was all connected. But the poster art kit and that lightsaber, which is just a flashlight with a big tube connected to it, those are probably the most, not valuable, but most sentimental items I have. And as far as masks go, I don't have any really super rare things, but I do like Pat Newman, who was a sculptress for Don Post. She's one of my favorite sculptors. And I have a few pieces like the Mesmer that she did. She did the Tor Johnson. I have quite a few of the different Tor Johnson masks. And those are probably some of my favorite pieces, the ones I'm most proud of. As of right now, with making masks is not my sole income. I actually work for a makeup effects company, and I spray bald caps. Currently transitioning to a place where sculpting is going to be my primary source of income. Being in production, it was good, to be in that side of things. Sometimes people go, oh, it's glamorous, the makeup effects world, but when you're just making products, it's almost like making the donuts. You're not really creating anything new, you're just making things for other people to create, which is great. But as an artist, and you kind of have that feeling, that urge that you want to do your own thing, you really just have to take a chance sometimes, and some people aren't able to do that. But if you have to work a normal job while you're sculpting or doing art, then sometimes that's just what you have to do. I know Shannon Shea, who was a effects artist who worked for Stan Winston for many years. He once said, if you're doing a day job, when you come home, drink some coffee and get out there and do your own thing. You can't wait on your own stuff. You gotta really just keep pushing and keep doing it if you really want to do it, until you get to that point where you can flip it and have your art be the thing that's supporting you, and not the day job or whatever supporting you. And advice for people who want to get into the business or just want to do art, I would just say, just do it as much as possible. Don't worry about likes on social media, what other people are doing on social media. It's great to be inspired. I think there's a ton of great artists out there. Every day I see people and I'm like, wow, you can't really follow those things. You just have to be kind of inspired by them and strive to do stuff that's just as cool. Practice, sculpt a lot. I mean, I've been sculpting for like 14 years. So, and I'm still not as good as many people. So use reference. There's nothing wrong with reference. Learn anatomy. That's something that everyone always says when they ask, if I want to get into sculpting, what do I have to do? I think a lot of the techniques are out there, and it's very easy to get information. And now we have Stan Winston School. Also Jordu Shell does mask making classes. There's tons of YouTube videos. You can also ask. I'm on Instagram, I'm on social media, so anyone ever has any questions about anything, they can, ask me too, and I would gladly answer their questions. I do sell my work, so you can contact me on Instagram. It's at Mortarheads. I actually have two Facebook pages. I have Mortarheads, The Art of Mark Enright, and I have another page just called mortarheads.com for some reason. And I also have a Squarespace page, which is basically just kind of some random art, pumpkin etchings and pumpkin carvings I've done, paintings, and my masks, of course. And I also have an Etsy page too, and they're all Mortarheads. So if you go Mortarheads at Squarespace, you'll find that, or Mortarheads on the Etsy app, it'll come up. It's all my stuff.
you.